All right, leading up to ABCA, already put out a video talking about how we can assess our lower half, the hips specifically, keeping this as surface level and applicable as possible so that you as a coach can take this right away to your practice, to a lesson, to a session, and help athletes get better. So we spoke more specific to the back hip. Remember, we have internal and external rotation. External is this direction, internal is this direction. As a hitter, when I go and sit to get into my back hip, I'm going into internal. As I go forwards and rotate my back hip, I'm going into external. So I spent more time, and this is really important. Think of this as that first domino. Well, just as important as this is, we know our front side's super important. So when I land as a hitter and I go to rotate, I'm going into internal rotation. For an athlete that has an excessive amount of internal rotation, which we tend to see because they tend to gain internal rotation at our high school level over the course of a season, they're going to be a hitter who's going to struggle with throwing on the brakes. So when they land, if they land with that front foot really open, which is something that's been taught as of late, this athlete will struggle with stopping their body, meaning their hips are going to keep turning, their torso is going to keep turning, and their arms and the barrel is likely going to keep turning. So they can't throw the brakes on, they're not going to have that strong front side, their direction and rotational power, all of that's going to be affected. So even if you do a good job on our back side, if the front side is not in a position to then stop that rotation, then we're going to have problems. That's more common. Athletes with an excessive amount or more internal rotation on their front hip, super, super common. You need to figure out, is this a mobility issue that you need to address and figure out, oh, hey, maybe we need to address that front hip, or is it a stability issue? Hey, we need to improve the stability because that extra range of motion is just how you're built. We need to make sure we learn how to use our glutes and our hamstrings to throw the brakes on. Or if you're somebody that, hey, you got pretty good strength, you have a ton of internal rotation, this is the way you're built, you're still struggling with that ability to throw the brakes on, hey, we might need to manipulate foot position and landing a little more closed with our foot or landing a little more closed with our stance. Using the body and putting it in a position to then be in a mechanically advantageous position to do what we want it to do, which is to have that strong front side. All options for that athlete as far as that front hip when it comes to hitters. The opposite can happen. We can have somebody who lacks hip internal rotation on their front side. So that hitter, when they land, most common thing that I've heard from the athletes that I've assessed is, hey, my hitting coach wants me to land with my foot at a 45 or slightly closed. Well, if I don't have enough space and I run into a roadblock, I run into a traffic jam, then what's going to happen is I'm going to rotate and my hips are going to stop early. If they stop early, then I'm going to send that energy up early. So everything's just going to happen too soon. And so what ends up happening to that hitter, tends to, is when they get here, they run out of space. They have no space for their hips are in the way, their torso's in the way, their hands get through the zone, they're gonna get jammed, they're gonna try and create space up top because they don't have space down below, they're gonna get disconnected, all of that ripple effect that happens up the stream. So if you're an athlete that lacks hip internal rotation, first figure out if that's just the way you're born. If that's the way you are and there's nothing we can do about it, then we might want to think about that first thing I talked about, which is landing with our front foot open, because that gives us more space on that front hip. You might be somebody who would be fine with stepping in the bucket because you just need to have that space for your hips to rotate, and it doesn't affect your ability to rotate your torso and your barrel through the zone. The core thought process here is, what does this joint do? How is it currently functioning? And is that functioning what we expect or don't expect? If we don't expect that, is it a mobility issue? Is it a stability issue? Is it a movement issue? Then how's that affecting our swing or our throw? From a hitter, again, lack of hip internal rotation is not very common, but for the hitters that tends to be this person, they get jammed a lot. They can't pull the ball, or if they do pull the ball, they hook balls foul, like a mile foul, because they run into this roadblock and they can hit the inside pitch, but it's got to be way out front. And so they'll hook a ball foul, and the coach says, oh, great job, straighten that out, keep your hands inside the ball. Well, if they keep their hands inside, they're literally going to run into this roadblock, and not going to have space to deliver their barrel. So on the hitting side, front hip, super important. We know that we have to have transfer power and have that stable front side and transfer the power through the zone. We got to figure out, okay, what is the makeup of our front hip and what do we need to manipulate? Foot landing? Do we need to manipulate the range of motion at the hip? Do we need to manipulate the strength at that front hip? Once you have that idea, then you can look at the swing and say, okay, hey, these mechanical issues I'm seeing, although these are physical issues we need to address, because you could give a hitter that has something going on with their front hip front toss and T work all day, and they can work around it, when we get into games, our body's going to move and perform in the path that's easiest versus optimal. So on the mound, we got our pitchers. We go down the mound. And again, for our high school population, we tend to gain range of motion on this front hip, gain internal rotation, because we're always driving into it. If I have a ton of hip internal rotation, I'm not gonna have the ability to basically have the pelvis in a position to then block on that front leg. So my pelvis is gonna keep going. And so I'm basically gonna have that soft front side. And so a lot of times for those guys is then when they land, they'll land with an overly bent knee and they'll just stay here. Or they'll basically collapse into that front side versus having that front foot be nice and stable as they rotate their pelvis. So excessive amount of hip internal rotation is common. Those guys might and will want to land closed because that will basically throw the brakes on earlier for them. That could be good or bad depending on your pitcher, because then again, there's more factors at play here. But simply, if you have an excessive amount of hip internal rotation, these guys likely will struggle with having that good front side that we want to see. They're likely going to be guys that we need to increase the strength that they have on that front hip to be able to put on that lead leg block. More common is the lack of hip internal rotation for our high school population when it comes to pitching on the mound. Those guys, they're going to land and they're going to rotate and they're going to get stuck. So they're going to get stuck and their choice is to go upstream, lower back, or they're going to get stuck and they're going to go to the knee. We know both those options aren't optimal. We're going to get low back soreness. We're rotating at a spot that we can't get rotation from. And then we're going to ping into our low back. It's going to get sore and our brain's going to say, we can't do that. So we're going to start adopting this. And we know that's a bad option too. So the guys that we see with lack hip internal rotation on their front hip, we'll see them land with their foot pointing way out to the side, because just like our hitters, if I can't get range of motion here, I'm going to go all the way downstream and cheat with my foot being open because it allows me to rotate and get all the way through. Other part that's a little counterintuitive, but we'll tend to see the same thing, is we'll land cross-bodied. And so again, thought process. What range of motion do I have? Do I not have enough? I need to improve that. Mobility. Do I have enough, but I don't control it well? Stability. If I do both those things, or this is just how I'm built, okay, we need to work around that when it comes to our mechanics because the body can't physically do what we're asking it to do. So front hip mechanics, super, super important. Working on applying it to the swing and to the throw. We'll likely have, and for all of our videos, I'll circle back, and for our softball population, we'll talk about the same videos and the same assessments and how it plays out on the softball side, because the female athlete is literally formed differently than the male athlete. So the swing and throw compensations we see are a little bit different. So keep an eye out for those videos. I hope that these videos have been helpful. Again, I want to present a thought process and connect it to the thing that really matters, which is how they perform on the field. And as you start seeing that connection to, okay, hey, I need to understand the human body a little bit better, figure out and just have that simple mindset of, okay, what range of motion do they have? Is that just the way they're born? Boom, we gotta work around it. If it's not, do we need to improve it? Mobility. Is it not and they have more? Okay, we need to improve stability. Having that thought process, I think we'll kind of connect the dots a little bit more as far as human movement, the weight room, and then skill development, and then obviously on-game performance.